A few hours ago, I came across a meme, the context of which I've seen before. This particular one actually was referring to allegations that are being made that a group of Australian special forces committed atrocities in Afghanistan, killing 29 civilians. Now, my take on that is if these men are found guilty in a fair trial, they should be punished. There's no excuse for soldiers hurting civilians ever. Um, and it isn't implausible that that could have happened. Um, we shouldn't jump to the conclusion that it can never be our boys, so to speak, as in any Commonwealth country. That needs to be fully investigated. But anyway, this particular meme had a picture of a sinister looking Australian soldier with blood dripping from his rifle, and a referee and a Muslim guy, and the referee was holding up the Muslim guy's arm and saying terrorist. So the implication here was, oh, look, the media is always vilifying Muslims. And then it had a lengthy list of all the things that, according to the poster, Muslims haven't done. And this is the part that I've seen many times before. So it goes something like this, and this isn't verbatim. It's not the full thing, but along these lines, Muslims didn't start World War One. Muslims didn't start World War Two. Muslims didn't kill 20 million Aboriginal Australians, and the figures are being thrown out here. Muslims didn't kill 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. Muslims didn't kill Native Americans. Muslims weren't responsible for the transatlantic slave trade, etc., etc. So it was naming all these terrible events and atrocities throughout history that Muslims weren't responsible for. Well, taken on surface level, that's fine, right? Muslims didn't start World War Two or World War One or the other things that are named. But the problem with this sort of meme is it is based on sheer distortion because it ignores the fact that before the transatlantic slave trade was the Islamic slave trade, which actually on some level is still ongoing when you consider the slavery that goes on in Islamic countries today. Um, we're talking about far bigger numbers than were involved in the transatlantic slave trade, and there is still not enough scrutiny of that. Some of the worst countries in the world today for exploitation of human beings can be found in Islamic countries. Um, but that's just one example. There's something profoundly dangerous about this sort of meme because what it actually amounts to is not defending Muslims from being unfairly vilified. What it actually amounts to is Islamic supremacy. Now imagine, if you will, post a meme saying white people were not X, Y, and Z, and it got into white identitarianism. People would say it's neo-Nazi, it's some sort of far right thing, and there's a reasonable chance that it would be. But one of the most dangerous words that are out there, in my opinion, is Islamophobia. Why? Because it's actively used to crush dissent. Now, the particular person who posted this, I looked at his profile because I always do that. I always want to see a bit more context to the messenger, so to speak. He was from Pakistan, and some of his posts were just kind of inspirational quotes, but at least half of them were promoting Islam in what he would considered a positive light. And um, I saw one which was preposterous, talking about how Islamophobic France is. Um, this mentality really, really needs to be both rejected and challenged. Rejected because if it's accepted, we allow this narrative, then it's just another part of the creeping mentality that enables theocrats and religious extremists to get their way. I mean, we see what's happening here in the UK with Humza Yousaf and the SNP in Scotland trying to push his legislation to criminalise opinions in people's own home under so-called hate crime legislation. Um, that must be robustly opposed because it's so loosely defined that it is rife for abuse. I don't trust, I'll just say it point blank, I do not trust Humza Yousaf. I believe that he is the sort of person who I was going to call him an Islamist. In some ways, he's worse, actually, because he ticked all the right boxes for tolerance. You know, he'd be pro gay rights, he'd be pro um, religious tolerance, and so on in that sense. On the other hand, he is always coming out with critique of Islamophobia, and he's a sort of politician that plays a tolerant liberal, but is actually nothing of the sort when you dig a bit deeper. So I think someone like Humza Yusuf really needs to be challenged because he's a legislator, and you know this sort of dangerous legislation will affect potentially millions of people in Scotland. But anyway, what is so infuriating about the sort of people who push this narrative that Muslims can do no wrong is more often than not they come from ultra conservative Islamic countries like Pakistan, which is well recorded for its intolerance towards minorities. In my opinion, no Pakistani Muslim has a right to point fingers at any other country for tolerance. None. Um, you know, Pakistan's a big country, 200 million people. In no way am I saying all Pakistanis are the same. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is very often the most vocal Islamists come from countries like Pakistan. And I would say to them, when you can turn around and say we have a problem in our society with religious intolerance, with Christians, Ahmadis, atheists routinely persecuted, with blasphemy laws being used to crush dissent, um, with violent intolerance towards minorities, when you acknowledge that, then maybe, just maybe, you could talk about Islamophobia in European countries. And there's some useful idiots in non-Muslim countries who support this mentality. It's absolutely infuriating. Um, but the point I would make is positive generalizations, saying all Muslims aren't capable of doing bad things, basically amounts to supremacy. That's like saying all white people are good, all Christians are good, all Britons are good, all Europeans are good, which of course is nonsense. So I don't see why Muslims who claim that, oh, Muslims cannot possibly commit terrorism, Muslims cannot possibly do bad things, why they should be allowed to get away with these lies. You know, under the logic that Muslims didn't start World War II, I could counter, well, neither did Christians, neither did a lot of other groups. That doesn't get Muslims off the hook. It doesn't mean that there are no examples in history of Muslim atrocities. The early Islamic conquests were drenched in blood. The Islamic conquest of India, some estimates some estimates suggest that tens of millions died. We'll probably never get an exact figure on it, but there's no question about it. It was an extremely bloody event. It was over a long time, but it was extremely bloody. One of the bloodiest events in human history, in fact. So really, when you see this meme and it's floating around the internet that Muslims didn't do X, Y, and Z, that's fine, but that does not mean that Muslims therefore are innocent. People are individuals, right? So um, you get individual Muslims who are decent people who care for others and are compassionate, etc. But you cannot say that all Muslims are innocent. That's a supremacist statement. And Islamic supremacy in this sort of way must be challenged. I don't think it's challenged anywhere near enough. You know, We have been a bit more open and a bit more honest about Islamic extremism, but I don't think we've been open enough about challenging Islamic supremacy. Now, why is that any different from white supremacy or black supremacy or any other form of supremacy? Islamic supremacy is based on a bigoted attitude towards non-Muslims. Islamophobia, how about kafir came across that earlier. Why not normalize that, i.e., the attitude that certain Muslims have towards non-Muslims? You should dismiss as kafirs. So um, this needs to be challenged. Really, really does. Um, and if you come from Pakistan, before you point fingers at Western countries, look at your own backyard. That's all I'm going to say.